Welcome to the Bookish Ballerina Podcast, where we talk about ballet, stories, art, science, economics, music, and everything in between. I'm your host, Eleanor Stewart, and I am a rather bookish ballerina.
Today, my guest is Maxwell Jones, economist and co-founder of Let's Rally, an app designed to get people off their phones and out into the world. We chat about the app, economics of the arts, and many other things. Enjoy.
Okay, hello and welcome to the Bookish Ballerina Podcast.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be on.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your background and how that has led to what you're doing now and what you're building.
Great. Yeah, I'm Maxwell Jones. I'm originally from Fairhope, Alabama. But over the past 4 years, I've been up in Chicago, studying at the University of Chicago. Studied economics and law. It was very mathematical, Chicago school style approach to the subjects. It was an awesome experience. And while at the University of Chicago, like in every college campus and setting, you certainly have a dynamic community. So while I was at the university, I was always kind of fighting the battle between being someone who's very type A and scheduled, someone who has to ensure that all the things that have to get done will get done, while also being someone who doesn't want to be so bound by our pre-planned activities that we forget to do life in the moment with the people around us.
Right.
So after graduation, I had a little bit of time before work starts, and decided to call up an old high school friend who's now a full stack developer named Bryant Brock. And we actually began what is now Let's Rally. Let's Rally is an app. And the simplest way to explain it is we help you find out which one of your friends are available right now. So say you have a 30-minute period with nothing scheduled, or you just got off of work and you don't know who's available to hang out. We want you to do life with others. So we make that easier. And so I think that's why it's probably interesting to you, because it's a very social and dynamic and active platform we have, is something we're building. And certainly the vision aligns with, I think, the topics you're exploring on this podcast. So I'm glad to be on. I'd be happy to describe more. But at the very least, that's a good place to start.
Yes, absolutely. So when were you still in the middle of getting your degree when you started? How did y'all start building it?
Yes. So while I was at the University of Chicago, it was always a struggle to find out, one, who was available between classes, who would go jump in the lake with me right now, who would maybe come study with me at a coffee shop or get a group together for last minute events. So these ideas were floating while I was at the university, but it wasn't really until the final quarter of my time at the University of Chicago that I called Bryant and we began kind of getting things going.
Awesome.
So it's been very, very recent. This has all been fast. You're catching me within the first 2 months of any and everything happening. So this all started May 7th of this year.
Okay, wow. I did not realize it was that recent.
Yes, super recent.
Wow. Awesome. So he's doing more of the behind the scenes programming.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, so Brian and I have a pretty great dynamic in the sense of I'm someone who kind of likes the big picture, loves kind of the philosophy behind what we're doing, is really inspired by the people that we're connecting. And Brian is certainly on the technical side. So he's helping my craziness and all my crazy ideas become something which usable and practical and something which actually improves life for people. So I think we're a pretty solid team.
I love it. Awesome. So how does the app work? I am an Android user, so I have not been able to explore it yet.
Great question. And Android is something we certainly hope to move to soon. But like any startup, we're limited in funds.
Right.
So we are currently in a phase, what they call MVP, or your minimum viable product. Yes. And it's really a testing phase. You're trying to find out what does a user resonate with and what really is superfluous. So what the app really does is it allows you to organize your contacts on your phone based on activity or location. Say you have 15 friends that generally like pickleball. let's use pickleball. It's quite popular nowadays. So you have 15 friends that generally want to know when you are going to play pickleball. And if they're available, they'll tag along. And if they're not, they won't make it. It'd be quite cumbersome to have a group chat that every single time anyone in the group was going to play pickleball, that everybody got a notification about it, and then everybody liked the message or sent an emoji, whatnot.
Right.
And on the same side, it's quite difficult if you want to send out 15 individual texts every single time you're going to play pickleball.
Yes.
So we try to streamline that process. We make it such that you can individually invite people that are within a group.
Okay, so it utilizes the existing contacts in your phone.
Bingo.
Do the other people have to also have the app?
Great. This is something we're working on as well. We currently have capability to message people through iMessage.
Okay.
And so I love Congress at times, but at other times they make life difficult for entrepreneurs. And one way they've made things difficult is SMS is actually a quite cumbersome process for companies to send out. So people can receive invitations through SMS or, well, not yet, through iMessage. But yes, once you're on the app, you just get a push notification. It says, for example, Eleanor is going to play pickleball in 10 minutes. Do you want to go? That's it. It's a very simple idea.
Yeah.
But oddly missed.
Yes. Okay. And you had a waiting list when you first created the idea. So how many people were interested? How many are using the app currently?
Great. That's a great question. So in the MVP phase, you certainly want to talk to people who are your key users.
Right.
But then you also have the 3 Fs, the friends, the families, and the fools, the people that buy on and bite are early adopters. So we're currently still in the 3F phase. We have a couple hundred people on the platform, which is a great spot to be.
Yeah, that's a great start.
The people that are on the platform aren't necessarily our key target audience.
Okay.
So there are a couple factors that make a target user of our application. One, they have multiple friends in multiple friend groups, such that not utilizing the same group chat is helpful.
Right.
Second piece is they need to be in a tight geographic area. So you're not going to be able to spontaneously go play pickleball if you live 45 minutes away. So certainly the most obvious use case would be for college campuses. You have thousands of people the same age who are highly active, meeting lots of new people, and all within about a 3-mile radius.
Yes.
So right now we're really gearing up for this upcoming school year. Even though I'm out of college, I get to put on the hat of a college student once again.
Yes.
Think like a 21-year-old or an 18-year-old, and really try to address a need that I felt while in school.
Okay. So are you reaching out? How are you expanding the number of users on the platform?
Great. While it is not a social networking app in the sense of you don't meet new people on the platform, it certainly uses social networking effects to grow. So right now in Chicago, there's a group of about 25 people that I'm pretty commonly doing life with pretty actively. And they are kind of this first set of users that are going to go back to their respective places in the fall. And so how we're growing is we're trying to do a grassroots growth. Shockingly, I do not have tons of money to pour into marketing right now. I know being a fresh graduate, fresh out of college, living in one of the most expensive cities in the U.S., marketing funds are not plentiful at this point.
Yes. Yeah.
And really, honestly, marketing isn't that effective in this sector. A 0.5% conversion rate is pretty typical for ads to app downloads. So the most effective way is for your friend to say, hey, I'm using this app. Do you want to be alerted anytime I'm going rock climbing?
Got it.
And that's precisely how we're growing. So we plan to grow through specifically a few colleges. We're really looking at SEC schools. Purdue is also one of our key target. University of Illinois, DePaul University here in Chicago. And we're hoping those avenues allow for grassroots growth in a way that is far more effective than spending hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars on marketing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And then I saw that it was originally launched specifically in Chicago. So is it only usable in certain geographical areas currently?
Great question. So a piece about our app is that it requires a server to be communicating with it. Not everything is happening immediately on your cell phone. You have to communicate to a computer somewhere. The computer communicates back to your phone, and it tells the phone what to display. For a lot of large apps, that's no issue because they can have computers everywhere, and so the speed at which your request is sent and then the answers are sent back, milliseconds. We, again, on a limited budget, are working with limited servers. So we
Yes.
did start with a number of servers here in Chicago, but recently have expanded into the Southeast and the East Coast.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
So while you could have used it anywhere, technically, it just would have been very slow.
Got it.
And it's kind of those target areas that we're going to eventually build out our
Yes.
server system.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Do y'all have investors, or how are y'all, or just the two of you slowly building?
Yeah. Investors are certainly people we're speaking with right now.
Okay.
I have plenty of people in the network who are interested. But like anything else, you do need to see this minimum viable product gain traction
Right.
before people are willing to spend money.
Yes.
The problem with apps nowadays is there are limited ways to make funds, to make money, to generate revenue.
Yes.
And investors want to see a positive return. And we philosophically are very against having ads on the platform. Also against the idea of users having a subscription to the platform. How we want to really grow and generate revenue is through local. We want to compete with Ticketmaster. We want to compete with the likes of maybe some. Resy is another example. Resy is an application that allows people to make reservations at restaurants. So we really think the opportunities for profit are through these kind of more professional avenues rather than through customers.
The users. Okay.
The users,
interesting. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so do y'all have a timeline on that side of things?
Great. Yeah. To be interesting to somebody like the owner of the Cubs or the manager of a restaurant group in Chicago or even a concert venue in New York, to be interesting to them, we would have to have a certain number of monthly active users.
Yes.
So MAU.
Yes. What number? Do y'all have it?
That's a great question. No. It's precisely the question.
Okay.
That's what we are trying to gauge.
Got it.
Realistically, the reason we, quote, launched in Chicago is because we're trying to generate a base within one location such that we can appeal to the owners of these venues in that specific geographic location. That number is going to vary. And the conversation with a restaurant group in a neighborhood is going to be a very different conversation than one with the owner of the Cubs.
Yes.
And so I think our number is in the tens of thousands before it's of interest of monthly active users, which is a crazy, crazy stretch. But I believe people really do want to spend more time with one another. Right. And I think people are recognizing the inadequacy of standard traditional social media methods. And whether we fill that gap is yet to be determined. But I certainly think it's so simple that it might actually work.
Yes. Cool. Awesome.
There you go.
Okay. Awesome. Now, I have kind of a more personal question. So as an obsessive planner, I guess it works for any time within the upcoming 24-hour period, correct?
Yeah, you've done your reading. That's exactly right.
Yes, awesome. So for fellow non-spontaneous people, what would you have to get them intrigued concerning the app?
Precisely. So we don't want to compete against event planning apps.
Yes.
Right. So anything over 24 hours in advance it's kind of an event.
Yes.
But here's how we want to appeal to someone, and this is kind of the vein which we are trying to find, is that imagine you're at a summer camp and no one has cell phones. It's you and all your friends, and you're eating dinner together at the table. What happens next? You say, oh, let's go play kickball. And you all stand up and you go play kickball. And somebody spontaneously says, I am really wanting some ice cream from the general store. Let's all go do this together.
Mm-hmm.
And what social media has done is it has made us, or social media and our obsessive planning, what it's done
Right.
is it's made us do something from 4 to 6. But as soon as 6 is done, we're going to leave our friends that we were just with and go do something else. And we're going to spend, we're going to chunk our time respectively.
Mm-hmm.
How we want to somehow appeal is to tap into that very communal need that we all have to do life with others. And it's a hard sell because we're so ingrained in it.
Right, we are. Yes.
We are so ingrained in it, and it works.
Mm-hmm.
You are most, quote, productive when you do life this way.
Yes. And also loneliest.
And shockingly lonely. You're exactly right. And so we want to take down the barriers of quickly gathering to do life together. There are odd social barriers. You're not going to make a group chat with 9 random people that don't know each other for an event that's going to be in 15 minutes. People could do it. They certainly don't, though.
Yeah.
So for the obsessive planners, we hope to maybe tap into this deep felt need that we have.
Mm-hmm.
We have to communicate it well. And so that is our challenge, and I think you're exactly right. It's a difficult one to explain, but I think certainly necessary.
Okay, awesome. And then what are some of your wildest long-term goals for the app?
Cool. I would love one day to receive a notification on my phone through Let's Rally that the Cubs are playing in 15 minutes and that tickets are 70% off if you're here in the next 15 minutes.
Nice.
That would be pretty wild. That would be exciting. I would love to see people deleting other social media apps because they do things in real life with friends. They don't simply like what they're doing somewhere else.
Yes.
Those are pretty basic dreams, but they require a lot in between now and then.
Yes. Do you think there is a place for traditional social media, or do you think that it is entirely?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, there's a place for it because so many people use it. It's satisfying some need. And as an economist, we have to look at incentives. And people are incentivized by approval. They're incentivized by someone saying they like them or they're beautiful, etc. Because we're a needy people.
Social approval.
And social approval is exactly what social media gives. So is there a place for it? Yes, of course there's a place for it because incredible things such as you reaching out and setting up this podcast, those things happen organically by people getting connected.
Right.
However, I feel that a lot of people feel this as well. Social media is not satisfying those needs.
Yes.
It certainly, scratches the itch, but nobody
not
feels
on a
really
deeper
satisfied.
level. Yeah.
Bingo.
Yes.
And I certainly think this is where perspective and someone's faith really comes into play.
Yes.
When someone is grounded and finds their confidence and identity in something other than their self-image.
Yes.
And for me, my identity in Christ gives me the freedom from the social approval aspect.
Right.
But when people are seeking that approval through social media avenues, I will guarantee they're going to come to the realization that it can't satisfy. So yes, there's a place for it, but it cannot satisfy the need.
Yes. Ooh, okay. Where can people download and learn more about the app?
Wow, thanks. This is a shameless plug. So currently it is available just to the Apple App Store, and it's available everywhere in the US now. We obviously have long-term goals to moving internationally, and we soon hope to be on Android because there's a large user base there.
Yes.
But currently it's just the App Store, Apple App Store. And I do hope people use it spontaneously in the sense of nobody prompts them, no friend prompts them.
Right.
But it certainly requires a bit of more social pooling whenever you're the first adopter of an app.
Yes.
So I'll say that to anyone listening who is like, oh, check it out. It's going to be hard at first if you're the first person on it. You're going to have to invite your friends to it. But I think it offers a tool which will bolster those friendships rather than cause any more hardships.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Awesome.
Can you
Very
tell me a
cool.
little bit about the Bookish Ballerina podcast and why this is of interest at all
Yes.
into kind of what you're building?
Yes. So it basically has two main goals. My first goal is there's some episodes directed toward that, and then some episodes directed toward the other. So it's not all for one thing. So my first and primary goal is to get more people interested in ballet and what ballet is and why it's exciting. Because, there's always comments ballet is boring or, all of those ideas. So I want to get more people interested in ballet and what it is like behind the scenes and also why they should go to the theater and be interested in it in the first place. And then my other goal is a bit more selfish, I suppose. But I dropped out of college, which I don't know if you know that. A lot. Some people listening might, some may not. But I also love learning. So I am talking to as many people as I can who I'm interested in learning from. So I've spoken with a composer. I've spoken with a phenomenal author who I've been a fan of for years, who's now co-owner of a publishing house. So that is the secondary goal.
Awesome. Well, It seems like you're certainly exploring the arts and literature, and now I guess social networking and the social life in a unique way. I really enjoyed kind of the questions you sent ahead of time, and enjoyed thinking a little bit about your different, economic theories. You're trying to explain the arts and the is it the not cost discrepancy of the arts? What is
cost disease?
Disease. Yes, disease. I knew it started with the D. Phenomenal concept and very well described.
Did you learn about, or did you study any of the cultural economists at all? I know that's a very niche genre of economics.
Certainly niche, but they, like all the other economists in their niche areas, rely on some pretty basic fundamental concepts.
Yes.
One of them just being growth of productivity. At the University of Chicago, we're a huge fan of the solo growth model, which really looks at investment and productivity over time and how that affects how a specific sector or a company, more the macro level, so a sector or a market grows. And what the cost disease of the arts is doing is it's noting that not all sectors are the same in how they grow.
Right.
And it does I think it offers a very compelling and convincing, hypothesis or thesis to why the arts struggle in a unique way in a hyper technologically focused society.
Right.
Yeah, I would love to hear kind of your thoughts and if you had any questions or why it was intriguing to you.
Yes. So I am interested in investigating the idea on how a for-profit ballet company could work in the United States, because I don't currently know of any for-profit ballet companies. There have been some, but they typically end up becoming nonprofits for funding purposes.
Yep.
But I think there is a way, and it would have to have a completely different organizational structure, probably a whole different concept on how the season would run. And, it would have to have multiple different sources of funding. So I have different ideas for that, but it's currently just a thought game at the moment. Okay. I do have long-term goals associated with it. But
do you mind if I prod into the thought game real quick?
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear your reasons why you think it tends towards nonprofit status, and what would be beneficial about being a company that is technically for profit?
Yes. So it tends toward nonprofit status because renting a theater is expensive. Hiring 40 minimum, maybe average, I don't know. Approximately 40 dancers for a production is expensive. Musicians are expensive. And there's so many people involved in making a production come to life. And the current, pause for a second. The current sources of revenue for most ballet companies are ticket sales, personal donations, and government grants, and other business sponsorships. So if a company with the current structure were to try to become for-profit, they would basically just have ticket sales left for the most part. And that is not enough to sustain all of the people who are employed. However, I guess the reason I think it's important is it is a very well-known fact that artists are not paid a lot, which isn't necessarily from an economic perspective a bad thing, but as an artist, it's tricky. So I have I guess, what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? Ulterior motives.
Certainly personally interested.
Yes, very much so.
That's fair.
So some of my ideas, this is just, a couple off the cuff, but there's a lot of time that is spent in the studio rehearsing, preparing, that there's no income generated from that. And I think I think many audience members would be interested in seeing that side of things. For maybe $5, come in for $5 on a Saturday, bring your children. People who couldn't afford to come to a ballet could still see it, or people who were interested in seeing all sides of it could come. I'd also love to get the ballet companies, smaller ballet companies, out into the community more, performing. I have this idea for Ballet in the Park that has ask dancers questions, a small performance, and then also a very beginner ballet class that would get people interested in ballet.
Very cool. And can those different methods of revenue, can they operate underneath the nonprofit status? Is there any reason that
they might? Yes, they might be able to. Another reason, I guess, for profit is one of the things that I'm leaning toward. Is I would love to create something that has profit sharing with dancers, which would mean there would have to be profits, not just with the dancers, but with the staff, with all employees.
Interesting.
I don't know.
These are great thoughts. Yeah. These are great thoughts for sure. It is interesting how, I guess you'll have to consider as you do this experiment and thought experiment, consider how the different, I guess, income streams as a nonprofit are going to add up, and especially as its tax status, how it affects the bottom line in the end.
Yes.
Certainly the U.S. code is confusing and requires a lot of work. But being for profit, something to consider. As soon as shareholders have to get paid, whether it's shareholders privately or publicly, have to get paid, they certainly get in. They have a say in how the ballet works. And all of a sudden, this artistic and maybe creative director, someone who otherwise would be taking a risk or might be pushing the envelope on what ballet or the art can offer, is now being pushed the opposite direction by shareholders who want consistent income, or maybe they're not willing to take that artistic risk. So certainly something that doesn't fit on the spreadsheet necessarily, but it will be difficult in your thought experiment.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes. 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 Do you have any thoughts on that, on reasons to be for profit or not for profit with relation to that?
It's I see where you're coming from in terms of wanting to increase the yield for the artists themselves. And I certainly think there could be um, a setup such that performers, it would have to be very specific to the company, such that the performers do get to um, e- enjoy a cut of the total revenue for a given um, for performance or series of performances, tour, etc. I don't know if that requires it to move into a different legal bracket of
Right.
for-profit incorporations, which then requires a lot of extra documentation, and tax status doesn't allow you to take donations, which I'm sure is probably solid income. I don't know if it's going to offer you that many benefits, because you can still do a quote for profit. You can still do profit sharing. I'm sure you could. I don't know the tax code well enough for the, the legal ramifications of what I'm saying, but off the top of my head, um, there has got to be. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I'm scared that the extenuating costs of that transfer is going to actually result in lower wages available
Yes.
for the artists. I'm willing to
Yes.
explore the idea, but
Right.
off the top of my head,
Yes. So if it weren't a transfer, if it was a brand new company that was not
yep,
trying to completely revolutionize from what they have, the
right,
nonprofit board of directors, started small, maybe one or two dancers, started with the community outreach side of things. I think there's a strong probability, maybe not probability, but possibility I will need to buy a theater in my life. We'll see. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of ways that could cut down on some of the non-personnel costs. I don't know. I don't know if nonprofit would still be more viable with those goals, but I'm
Are you looking for the US market, or are you also considering internationally? Because it
I'm
certainly,
considering it, yes.
okay, yeah. So um, you certainly have to look at who is the user slash consumer in this instance, and you have to gauge their willingness to pay.
Right.
And
Yes. The US, it's low
the
currently.
US, sadly, is not
Very low.
very culturally mature. There's a pretty low appreciation for very many beautiful things. Um, and that's built in. I could go that whole rabbit hole about why I think that, whether it's consumerism or maybe aesthetics, or any of these different explanations.
Right.
But that's just the case. So yeah, I think certainly this kind of dance company, in the way you're describing it, rather than maybe the traditional dance company term, um, might be viable in much more um, what is it? Artistically literate areas,
Yes.
and that's going to be difficult to find the
Right.
right market.
Yes. Yes. That's another
Oh,
avenue. That's another reason this podcast exists. It's
sure, yeah.
increasing the demand. Now, I don't know how much one podcast can do that, but start somewhere.
Start. Hey, words are a powerful thing. It's a great place to
Yes.
start.
Yes.
And what's the
Absolutely.
craziest long-term vision beyond just a company that shares profits for you?
That's my primary. That's my primary right now. I think that's approximately 20 years down the road. I'd love to live overseas and then, in the somewhat near future at some point for an unspecified duration of time. And
Great.
that will also probably help with this research and this idea. I'm learning German. We'll see. I don't know that I'll live in Germany, but I would love to learn as many languages as I can. I don't know. I have various ideas, and how they fit together remains to be seen.
Yes, that is the name of the game. That's going to be exciting to see where all this goes. Um, is hmm, is is ballet the you're obviously a writer, you're an artist, You're an academic in the sense of you study things
Right.
well. There are plenty of people that go to college and do not study. Are there other areas that you could imagine yourself exploring, whether artistically or intellectually, that are yet to be fully addressed so far?
Oh, yes, certainly. I'm still writing. That for me right now is more of a outlet than it is a true profession. But I'm interested in that. I've worked in editing, so I have some experience in that industry as well. Yes, and I have an economic obsession at the moment, so I'm currently I've discovered that you can buy used textbooks online for $7.
Yes.
That's my favorite thing.
Don't have too much fun in the Chicago School of Thought. They'll get on to you. No, I'm just kidding. There's some great thinkers. Economics is a beautiful, beautiful subject, but it is so unknown. If anybody says that we understand really what's going on, it's like talking to someone who is in the medical field in the early 1800s.
Yes.
It's such a new field, and I think you'll really enjoy kind of those ever-evolving ideas.
Yes.
So certainly much to be explored.
Yes. Do you think it is more well-defined macroeconomically or microeconomically?
Oh, this is fun. Goodness, I don't think anybody truly understands what's happening on the macro level. We try to find correlation and causation, and we try to isolate certain variables, and we try to really find out what is causing X move, right?
Yes.
The micro level is certainly something we wrestle with more often, right? We experience these moves in our day-to-day lives, and sometimes the correlation between two things is so high that we can almost determine causation.
Yes.
So I think we certainly have a better grasp on microeconomics, because macro has too many variables at play.
Right.
And
such a long time span.
It's such a long time span. We try to account for a lot of things, and economists are incredible at doing that. But yeah, still very early. Have you had any specific thinkers that have inspired you, or what has that exploration been like?
So my favorite so far has been Alan Peacock, mostly because he wrote down the ideas that are in my brain.
Right.
Some of his ideas, I don't know if you've read a lot of him, but for our listeners, some of his ideas are that in the short term, a government-sponsored or nonprofit art structure, he was focused more on orchestras, but a government-sponsored or nonprofit structure is more viable. But in the long term, for-profit would be better. And now how long that long term is, if it exists within one person's lifespan, remains to be seen.
Yeah. I feel like these economic models make a lot of claims about this indefinite long term.
Right.
Which the hurdle is there's some necessary investment of some sort, whether it's time, money, experience, etc., that requires to get past this short-term bump.
Yes.
And the problem is people are certainly usually have a shorter time span in view than the long term. Yeah, so that's great. Certainly I encourage you to read, Friedman and Solo and those guys. There's a professor at University of Chicago that just put out a book. He's focused on human capital.
Oh, okay.
His name is Pablo Pena. I think he wrote a book, something along the lines of Human Capital for Everyone, or essentially it's a very approachable book. And he tries to not use so many equations within the writing that you can actually appreciate, how are the ways that our parents raise us, or the society we grew up in, or our education, how does that investment, quote unquote,
Yes.
how can that be quantified, and how can we describe those things? I think you would find his ideas um, quite approachable and helpful.
How do you spell his last name?
Pena, Pena.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I think he just recently published that book. So lots of good thoughts there. I had a wonderful class with him. He gave a lot of insight in the writing of my thesis.
Okay.
Do
Talk about your
recommend.
thesis, because this interests me a lot.
Okay. So for those who are interested in employment contracts and employment law, this is going to be exciting. And for those of you who have never once thought about that, maybe this is going to spur you to check your contract you're currently held by. But I wrote my senior thesis at the University of Chicago on the Federal Trade Commission and its proposed ban of non-compete agreements. So
Yes.
just to define a few terms, non-compete agreements are something you sign when you first start working with an employer that says, I will not go work for your direct competitor for 18 months within 5 miles of your location, even if I quit.
Yes.
So say somebody works for Google, Microsoft is just down the road, they quit at Google, they've probably signed an agreement that says they can't go work at Microsoft.
Yes.
The Federal Trade Commission proposed to get rid of those, to say, no, they can go work wherever they want. You cannot restrict that. That is not fair. And my thesis was an exploration of the philosophical groundings, as well as kind of the precedent set within the courts over the past about 130 years-ish. But non-competes have a much longer history, since the 1400s. But why in the world and how in the world did we get to this point, such that the Federal Trade Commission all of a sudden says, no, I know we've used it for hundreds of years, but it is out. It's very exciting. My thesis came out in April. The Federal Trade Commission voted to pass this ban in late April, I believe. And now it is currently being held up in the courts in Texas, in the Fifth Circuit Court. I expect it to be taken to the Supreme Court and rejected because Chevron was just overturned, which is huge.
So what
I
is
do recommend.
that?
Yeah, for listeners, Chevron was Chevron doctrine was a precedent set through. I forgot. I really should know this. I think it was the U.S. versus Chevron, but don't quote me on that. But pretty much that doctrine said that agencies should be given deference. So when a court looks at something that an agency has done, an agency is a group of employees, government employees through the executive branch.
Okay.
And if a court says, hey, we see that you made this decision to ban all plastic bags in the United States, for example,
Yes.
that the court can't be like, well, we doubt your research and we're actually going to turn that down. What Chevron says is, well, the agency, they're the experts here, so they should be given deference. The Supreme Court recently just said, no, the courts can actually shoot down stuff that agencies do. It's a big win for legal conservatives, a massive loss for those who are for higher agency power. And I'm quite excited to see all the shakeout that this has. It has a lot of implications. So to recap what we just said, my thesis was on the Federal Trade Commission and their decision that was around non-competes. It is correlated to the recent Supreme Court decision on Chevron doctrine. Those two things are related. I highly recommend reading about it because it will impact your life. And so that's what I studied. That's what I did. And for some reason, it's crazy. Economics touches everything. So Pablo Pena was invested and helped me kind of think through the ideas of human capital, which you take from one job to the next, which is what non-competes block. So that's how all that came together.
Interesting. So what were your conclusions in your thesis?
my conclusions were that the Federal Trade Commission did not have the authority to do so.
Okay.
They did not have the authority to ban non-competes, and both economically it's impractical and also constitutionally not acceptable. And if you want to read that, it's on my LinkedIn. Feel free to read through 54 pages of that. Maybe you'll find some questions that spur some further thought. I don't offer too many conclusions in the thesis beyond my exploration of the history and what I expected to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I do make a couple normative claims about my opinion, but I certainly leave it open for interpretation.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that, as you said, because it does affect my life, because I have non-compete agreements. Yes.
Yes, I'm sure, especially as an artist in a pretty small industry.
Yes.
And so I'm sure that people want to grab up talent and secure it for themselves and hedge against the risk of you ever leaving them. So yeah, it affects something like 30% of the workforce in the U.S. So plus or minus a few percentage points, but certainly something people should check out if they have not ever considered it.
Awesome. Okay, so what are some of your long-term goals related to that side of things, or unrelated, I suppose?
Great, yeah. Wow. Super long-term goals are pretty nebulous. So we'll start with the shorter term. I'm going to be working in consulting, as most college graduates in economics do, or many do. And the goal is to see as many case studies of businesses as possible, such that I can own my own one day.
Yes.
Let's Rally is just one of many things that I believe will be a brainchild. And so I'm excited to kind of get that experience. Law school might be in the future. MBA might be in the future. But all these things are yet to be seen. If the Lord wills, I'll do this or that. And those are some things which are intriguing.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I have only 2 more questions.
Let's hear it.
They're fairly brief. What is something you are learning right now, or learning about right now?
It's a good question. I'm learning how to take feedback, critical feedback specifically. And this is not an intellectual experience. I'm not reading about how to take feedback. I've been in a very intellectual world for the past 4 years. So I'm enjoying, with this project, with Let's Rally, kind of what started this. It's hard to take feedback on something you created, but it's actually the most important thing you can do. I wouldn't say historically I've been the best at that. But certainly it required a lot of intentionality and learning how to not take things personally, and a lesson that I'm very glad I'm learning now before I'm too deep into the workforce. So that's something very practical I'm learning right now. Other than that, kind of more intellectual or deeper subject, been doing a deep dive actually on the scriptural understanding and backing of baptism, right? Something I thought I understood.
Interesting.
And I thought, I thought I had checked all the boxes there, but that has actually been a recent exploration and kind of relearning a lot. So that's been it's been a great thing to learn about.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So what are some things you've learned?
Yeah, it's complicated. That's what I've learned. It's certainly not a point. It's not a salvific point in the sense of I think churches that disagree on this point can still certainly partner and do wonderful ministry. But I think the book of Acts gives us a lot of interesting case studies. It doesn't. It offers. It's not normative or prescriptive, but offers case studies. Obviously, the Gospels offer us plenty of examples, and then arguments for and against infant baptism have been really interesting. And interesting is that helpful of a word. They have been quite confusing. How about that? Interesting as a word doesn't really tell you anything. Interesting good, interesting bad. They've been confusing and quite difficult to wrestle with. So some of my major takeaways is that my staunch stance on the on infant baptism and what it stands for and how it operates within the system of sanctification and faith um, are being shaken up and maybe honed and nuanced. I think I took a pretty wide stance originally.
Okay. Interesting. Very cool. Awesome. And then what is one thing you wish you could teach everyone?
Ooh, what is one thing I could teach everyone? Fun question. I wish I could teach everyone that you don't have to experience, you can still be goals oriented, but not experience the anxiousness whenever your path goes off plan.
Yes.
I think something that sailing taught me specifically, sailing is a strange experience because say you want to go directly in front of you, you can see the land ahead of you and you know that's where you want to end up. But you're probably going to have to take 20 turns or tacks or jibes, as the technical terms are, to get there. And you might even have to do a little loop-de-loop in there. Who knows? But sailing can teach you incredible things about your life path as well. You can have a goal on the horizon, and you think you know how you're going to get there. But often we get so caught up in the path that we're taking that we become paralyzed whenever it doesn't go according to plan. So if I could teach myself something, my younger self something, and maybe speak a word into someone's life right now, it would be to certainly set goals and chase them quickly.
Yes.
But be very ready for that path to be far more different than you expected. And it certainly makes life a lot easier. It allows you to be content early. You're not just content once you reach the goal, but you'd be content where you are. I think if everybody learned that, the world would be, especially type A people, would be in a much happier place. So, those are my 22-year-old words of wisdom.
I have been learning that myself recently.
Yes.
I think this was an Eisenhower quote, but it's plans are worth nothing. Planning is worth everything.
There you go.
I thought that was insightful.
Well said. Very well said.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your ideas.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and asking great questions. I look forward to seeing how the rest of the conversations pan out and all the things that you discover in this exploration.
I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Eleanor.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Bookish Ballerina Podcast. To continue learning more, head to Instagram and follow at the.bookish.ballerina or at the.bookish.ballerina.podcast. You can also head online to www.buymeacoffee.com/the.bookish.ballerina to support the podcast and learn more about it. Thank you so much. See you for the next episode.